everyone, and welcome to Curating Culture. Today's program, we will have a review of Season 1 of Curating Culture seminar series. I am Georgette McGlashan Miller, Research Fellow at the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Memory Bank. With me today, I have Chelsea Stevenson, our Research Officer at the ACIJ JMB and also producer for Curating Culture. The purpose of today's show is to make you aware of all that we did in Season 1 and to encourage you to go and visit the videos and to get the information from them. But first, for those who did not catch Season 1, let me tell you what is Curating Culture. Curating Culture is a seminar series hosted by the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Memory Bank, where we seek to bring together academics and practitioners who specialize or who are experts in intangible cultural heritage of Jamaica, and where they come and they share their experiences, they share their research. So students, researchers, and anyone who is interested in learning about the African presence in Jamaica in relation to other ethnic groups in the Caribbean and in the diaspora can get information. So now that you are clear on what Curating Culture is, let's get into our review of Season 1. We'll kick off with Chelsea sharing about our first presenter of 7, Marsha Hall.
So we're going to watch the clip of Miss Hall telling us exactly what UNESCO commemorative days are.
What are international days, you may wonder? These are days in the calendar that have been designated by the United Nations through resolutions to highlight issues and themes of critical global importance to people and the planet. And resolutions are simply decisions or declarations voted on by all member states of the United Nations General Assembly. Tasked with these arrangements of the commemorative days is the Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, commonly referred to by its acronym UNESCO, a specialized agency of the UN, launching various programs in recognition of international days. UNESCO's active participation is a powerful and effective advocacy tool to mobilize governments, citizens, private sectors, public institutions, and civil society in global partnership, while centering attention on urgent global issues of education, culture, and the sciences. Each International Day is an opportunity for all stakeholders to not only observe, but organize activities and raise awareness related to a specific theme of the month that echoes global or regional significance.
So here Ms. Hall talks to us about what exactly UNESCO commemorative days are. Lots of people don't know about these commemorative days. The ACIJ here, us researchers, we are tasked with actually writing blog posts in recognition of these commemorative days, because a lot of the times they tie into our mandate. For example, when we talk about World Indigenous Peoples Day, when we talk about like recognizing the people of African descent, recognizing the African slave trade, when we talk about just days that mark unique cultures and celebrate our own Jamaican culture. So to recognize these international days and be a part of the celebration draws Jamaica into the conversation about these commemorative days and about the diversity which they encourage.
Yeah, and you find also that quite a few of the commemorative days have to do with countries or persons that encountered colonialism. So in that way, a lot of them connect and identify with the ACIJ's mandate because the post-coloniality of their situation, being people of African descent, and a lot of people in what is now considered as the global South are the ones that these commemoration days try to bring. What's the word that you mentioned?
Diversity.
Diversity, or is it identity?
Bring identity to it.
Identity to it, or to bring recognition, right? Recognition to these persons. So it's not just recognition to the days, but to the people and those various groups that are sometimes marginalized still. And, you know, to give them a voice as well, not just through our blog articles, but through having them posted in other areas that students can access them, that researchers can access them, and the ACIJ JMB is one of those places, an archive. So next we'll talk about our second interview. We're not necessarily going in the order of which they are posted on our YouTube page. That's our ACIJ JMB YouTube page. We talk about Mr. Gavin Walters. Mr. Gavin Walters is an MPhil PhD student and also staff at the UWI Mona, that's University of the West Indies Mona. And his theme was about One Jaw to Steam as a Bubble, Reggae Queen and the Ganja Debate. What he focused on was how reggae songs by females captured the use of ganja in Jamaica. And we're just going to play that clip and then we talk about it some more.
So in general, my work is really looking at representation of ganja in Jamaican music. But beyond just that, we're looking at what folk knowledge, what folk practices may also be contained in the music, and in that containing represents a memory bank, as you say, as ACIJ is dealing with as well. That memory, what part of the music is retaining our folk knowledge culture?
So we heard Mr. Waters said it himself, how his research would fit into the mandate of the ACIJ JMB. He was looking at how the songs retain the folk knowledge around the use of ganja in Jamaica. Another interesting section of his presentation, which is later down when you watch the video, he outlines the different names or the different methods used in smoking and distinguishing between male and female, saying that, men would use the chalice, which was something inherited from India, and women would use the hookah. So in our current debate about ganja in Jamaica, we see that this hookah culture is coming on more, where you can go to a smoke shop and people learn to smoke. But his presentation is also useful again for students, for researchers, and even for the Rastafari community as well. It gives voice to the females and what they think about ganja and the smoking of ganja, because many times in our society it's just men that smoke. So go check out Gavin Walters' Steam as a Bubble and get your information.
All right, so next I think we can go to Dr. Joseph Farquharson, arguably one of our most popular seminars to date. Hopefully there will be someone in season 2 to surpass him or surpass that group. So Dr. Farquharson, his presentation was on African words in Jamaican language. Just a little backstory. I saw Dr. Farquharson give a presentation at the Institute of Jamaica, where the ACIJ is a division of, and it was a part of a larger series that talks about the music, the religion, and the language brought to the Caribbean, and brought to Jamaica through the period of enslavement and slavery. So I was so fascinated by his presentation, I invited him onto Curating Culture to talk about his work. So I'm going to play you guys a clip and then we'll discuss afterwards.
Doppy, which has about 60 derivatives, and I list out some of them, so permit me. But I think you need to hear them to just understand what I went through as I realized that Africa had lived on in its ability to mix and mingle with other words. So we have Doppy umbrella, Doppy box, Doppy bands, Doppy bat, Doppy baby, Doppy bickle, Doppy bud, Doppy cherry, Doppy tree, Doppy truck, Doppy chocho, Doppy dog, Doppy dan in neagle, Doppy figgle stick, Doppy fifi, Doppy fly trap, Doppy gun, Doppy girl, Doppy gal, Doppy kalalu, Doppy kankara, Doppy cotton, Doppy ketcha, Doppy cup, Doppy cucumber, Doppy coconut, Doppy calf, Doppy cap, Doppy man, Doppy mecca, Doppy melon, Doppy up, Doppy house, Doppy pop gun, Doppy poison, Doppy peas, Doppy picnic, Doppy pinda, Duppy Pumpkin, Duppy Puss, Duppy Riding Horse, Duppy Show, Duppy Sickness, Duppy Slimy Pear, Duppy Soursop Leaf Tea, Duppy Story, Duppy Tomatoes, Duppy Tomato, Duppy Woman, Duppy Yard, Baby Duppy, Pickney Duppy, Man Duppy, Woman Duppy, Coolie Duppy. And I did that to show you how much there is if we change our perspective. And these do not even include phrasal idioms such as set duppy pan, which means to use.
I think I use a coolie duppy a lot.
What is a coolie? What is a coolie duppy?
I don't know. It's just a phrase, something that I grew up with, knowing like the idea
What's
of
the
the coolie
context of
duppy
a coolie
is
duppy?
that you're as persistent. Your text said for me like coolie duppy. So it's like it's the type of spirit then that you can't get rid of. So it's the type of person that you can't get rid of. You're like a coolie duppy. I probably need some more research.
You learn something new every day. So this was one of the standout parts of this presentation and the presentations overall. So earlier in his presentation, Dr. Farquharson talked about the importance of identifying these African words in Jamaican language, the importance of documenting and show that despite oppression, despite the plantation society, despite the machine that was chattel slavery, aspects of our African ancestry has lived on and has mixed and evolved and continue to evolve as time goes on. So this clip, as we call it here in the office, Duppy, it shows the many variations of how the word duppy that didn't originate here in Jamaica, is not a European derived word, different variations of how they are put together to describe something. I went and researched some of the things that he mentioned there, and we know them by other names.
Oh.
So I remember looking up, I think it was Duppy Soursop, and when it came up, it was Noni.
Yes, yes.
So if there's anybody out there who have heard about a duppy tomatis and want to tell us what a duppy tomatis is, feel free. I know what a tomatis is, but duppy tomatis, I haven't the slightest clue.
Yeah, and if you know anything, just drop us a line in the comments so we can do further research, because we're the one holding the archive and we want to get you accurate reference cited information. So it is you that have the information. Let us have an interview. Let us talk and continue to build a memory bank. Next, we're going to move on to talk about Dr. Michael Barnett. Dr. Michael Barnett is senior lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Mona, in the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Works. His presentation was another very interesting one, which has gotten probably most of the views.
I think it's been our most viewed video so far.
Yes, and it's not that I'm surprised, but his theme was on Rastafari as an African-based spiritual movement, and you would think that we have exhausted talking about Rastafari, but that some of the information that he presented were still new to us, and we can still benefit from it as researchers, as we're pushing, and for students to come and consult our memory bank, consult our videos online, and learn more about Rastafari as an African-based movement. We're going to play a short clip now, then we discuss it as we're doing with the others.
The orientation of Rastafari is clearly depicted by their veneration of Emperor Haile Selassie I, who was crowned Emperor of Ethiopia on November the 2nd, 1930. The early Rastafari leaders, in fact, made a point to preach to black Jamaicans that they should cast off the key colonial compulsion of worshipping the English king, King George V. This is in the 1930s, and instead worship the African king, Haile Selassie I, who I should add was formerly known as Rastafari before he was crowned Emperor Haile Selassie I. So the name of the movement comes from Emperor Haile Selassie himself. Now, while Ethiopia holds a special place in the hearts of Rastafari, the whole entire continent of Africa is in fact deemed is dear to the Rastafari flock. They consider it the motherland. And so when Rastafari vocalized repatriation it is not just about going to Ethiopia to settle, but other African countries as well, such as Tanzania, Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa, which are also popular options. Of interest is that the largest Rastafari community in the world dwells in South Africa. Census information indicates that the Rastafari community there is at least 3 million strong. So here we have an interesting phenomena in that Rastafari in Jamaica birthed itself from African influences such as revivalism and from Pan-African voices such as that of Marcus Garvey and from the grand coronation of Emperor Haile Selassie himself. But at the same time, they have also influenced Africans on the continent. So we have a circular relationship of sorts. Now, very importantly, even the growing of locks by the Rastafari, which didn't really start until the late 1940s, is deemed to have been influenced by the Mau Mau warriors in Kenya, who at that time were actively and visibly rebelling against British colonial forces in that time, according to late Rastafari scholar Barry Chavons. So there's an argument that the growing of locks by Rastafari in Jamaica was a direct African influence. And then in turn, as I said, the Rastafari movement goes on to become more established. It in turn influences very strongly Africans on the continent.
All right, so Dr. Barnett sharing on Rastafari and its African-based spiritual movement in Jamaica. So what stood out to me about this, because we thought that we've heard everything, or mostly everything that we need to know about Rastafari, is when he said that the largest population of Rastafari, over 3 million, is in South Africa. I did not know that.
I didn't know that either.
I knew
Rastafari was pretty widespread globally, especially through the movement of reggae music. Of course, that is how the teachings have moved. But I didn't know that the largest population was in South Africa.
Right. So the interesting thing about that is the conversation.
That's like the same size as Jamaica's population.
Exactly. That is because we're what, 2.9?
2.9.
Thereabout. So it is highlighting now the conversation between Jamaica and Africa. And it's almost like a circle, or should I say a cycle. And this not only happens with the language, but with the music as well. And now with the religious practices. So he spoke about the veneration for His Majesty, and that the movement Rastafari was from the original name of His Majesty before his coronation. It's really a term, Ras and Tafari. And he also spoke about the drumming patterns, that the African drumming is one of the most dominant thing as a spiritual movement, where we see the same, or we hear the same sounds in Kumina, as well as the sounds of Nyabingi. And we can talk about people like Count Ozzy, that started to play Nyabingi as a part of reggae music. And the other dominant things are like the dress. Most Rastafarian, I should say, seek to dress like African people, not just in terms of the dashiki, but in terms of the tying of the head, the head wraps.
Like modesty.
But the important thing now about the spiritual movement is how Rastafari kind of came up out of the spiritual movements like Kumina and revivalism. Right, I know Rastafari, so the wearing of the uniforms, the wearing of the gowns.
And the colors that are used, the more militant colors.
And one of the most outstanding things that he said about the mama and the locks that Rastas wear now, and how Barry Chavons connected that to mama as a direct, what's the word I'm looking for, resistant, to say that we're not going to be like the colonials, we're going to wear our African hair. And we'll talk more about hair when we start to talk about Monique Bernard. But that's the way how it fits into our mandate to capture the African continuities. I say I'm not going to use African retention anymore.
The continuities in
African
Jamaican society.
Right. And this too is another presentation that is heavily referenced and heavily sourced. So if you are conducting research, you can use, Dr. Barnett's reference list that is also projected through his PowerPoint presentation. And when you're doing your research, you can come here and you're getting A grade information from the experts in the field. So we'll move on next to which presentation?
Okay, so the next one I have, I think the last one I have now is for
Dr. Pennant.
Dr. Pennant. Dr. April Louise Pennant.
Yes.
She was a visiting research fellow here at the ACIJ JMB from Cardiff University in the United Kingdom, in Cardiff, Wales. And her research was very different from the others that we featured here on Curating Culture. She was doing historiographical research, connecting the contributions of African enslaved here in Jamaica to the building of the Penrhyn Castle in rural North Wales. So I thought this was an interesting thing to feature because all throughout the other presentations they're talking about, African retentions in Jamaican culture, the continuity, as Georgette said, of the African enslaved experience in our society today. But Dr. Pennant's research focuses on something that is often overlooked, how the Caribbean, how enslavement built the United Kingdom. Obviously, I don't think it's something that is really overlooked, but it's something that needs to be said more. And she has direct information from one direct plantation to a direct estate in the United Kingdom.
And based on the kind of findings that are already out there, without enslaved African people in Jamaica, particularly Clarendon and Westmoreland, which is where the Pennants from Wales, their plantations were, there would be no castle, there would be no roads, there would be no development of the local area, which is where the profits from their 6 plantations were pumped back into. So as I said, this is a 3-year research project which sees me essentially reversing the triangular slave trade, right? So starting from Wales, which is where the castle is and is a monument to this history, then coming to Jamaica, which is where I am now. And then next year, God willing, I'll be going to West Africa based on my findings of where hopefully the enslaved African people would have originally came from. And the purpose of that kind of triangle as well is just kind of to show the connections, the global connections, and the importance and contributions, as I said, of the enslaved African people who are often not really within this story. Because what we know so far is that the Pennant family of North Wales, they also had quarry mines, which again they used from the profits of their plantations, and they also exploited the local people in Wales. And that culminated in the biggest strike in British history from, I believe, 1900 to 1903.
So this clip perfectly sums up Dr. Pennant's research. It's about reversing the triangular trade, particularly in the case of the Pennants of Wales and their plantations throughout Jamaica from Westmoreland to Clarendon. Now, if you notice a similarity, her last name is Pennant. So she is in some ways kind of tracing her own family tree and trying to make connections of her own. And I think that is just the most fascinating thing in the world. During her stay here, after this presentation, she actually went to Clarendon, spoke to people there, tried to seek information about the old Pennant estate, if anyone there had any memories or had heard any stories. And she also visited Westmoreland because a part of her methodology was doing interviews with experts, interviewing locals who lives in the area, and also doing archival research on the various estates. So very thorough research. Even though this is our second year, it's still in its beginning phases because she did year 1 in Wales, and she has now left the island. She has now left ACIJ for about a month or 2 now. And she's back in the UK, continuing her research, putting her findings together. And now next year, she'll be going to West Africa to definitely trace the roots of where these enslaved Africans were from. But in her presentation, she did mention that without the profits from the slave trade, there would be no castle, no Penrhyn Castle, no roads, the local economy would not be what it was during that time. So I really, really enjoyed her take on something like this. Oftentimes you see research of just enslavement in the Caribbean, but you don't see the effects of it in the UK. So I like Dr. Pennant's presentation for that.
Yeah, so Dr. Pennant's research is very current. You know, we get to see it as it go along in the moment, and we look forward to the end of her research when she's completed the leg in West Africa, and hope to have her to share that with us again.
Yes, Dr. Pennant, we hope to have you back on Curating Culture to have the scoop, the exclusive on your completed research.
And I know that Gavin Waters also is supposed to give us a part 2 because his research is also in progress. As he mentioned, it was outtakes from where he was in his MPhil study. So next, I want to talk about Monique Barnett Davidson, Senior Curator at the National Gallery of Jamaica. This was one of my very favorite presentations because we are looking at culture, but we also are the custodians for intangible cultural heritage in Jamaica. And this presentation centered on the Faces of Us exhibition that was at the National Gallery of Jamaica in 2023. And Monique came over to share with us, to give some critical analysis on 7 pieces that we selected, to say, reflected African identity and Africanness, if I could use that word. So let us hear what Monique has to say about this exhibition, and then we talk about it some more. Originally, how many pieces do we have in the Face of Us?
So the Face of Us features actually 50 works of art, and they are in the expressions of painting, drawing, printmaking. There are also 2 massive installation projects in the exhibition as well.
Okay, and we decided to look at 7 just for the time that we have on Curating Culture.
Yes.
These 7 pieces, we believe, reflect or contain some African retention based on the image itself and based on, do you say artifacts that are in the image?
Yeah, I mean, in art historical terminology, we would call them icons or symbols.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So based on the symbols that are in the image, I'm just going to read the name of them before we get into them. Right. The first one is a piece by Zoria Allen, and it's untitled. The second one is titled Obama Omi, King of Water, by Leslie Ann Bell Nevis Elliott. The third is by Camille Cheddar, titled Build. The fourth is by Tishana Fisher, that's also untitled. The fifth is titled Fear of God by Gerald Gordon. The sixth, Portrait of the Artist Painted in the Image of God by Kevarni KR. And the final one, Reimagining Nani, Avatar Erzuli by Melissa Lane. So I'm just going to ask Monique to talk about each of the portraitures individually, and we will make connections with our African past and our Jamaican identity.
Okay, all right, thank you. So before I get into these portraits, I just want to reiterate some of what you had explained to the audience in terms of the premise of the show. Particularly the part about it being an exhibition of identities. For those of us who, who are studying culture or observing culture in particular ways, we understand that even an individual's identity is comprised of has a number of different components to it. And so when we talk about the artworks that are featured in this exhibition, we are conscious of the fact that it's not just one identity that can be read into the interpretations, but a multiplicity of them. Our present selves are informed by our past in a lot of ways, and there is a synergy that happens in terms of contemporary expressions of that past. Yes. So as we go through the different, the 7, it's something that I would definitely encourage the audience to pay attention to. I think the images are being brought across the screen.
Yes.
So they'll be able to see it. So let's start with Zoria Allen's work. Now, one of the things about the Face of Jamaica exhibition is that we observed a very strong explorations of blackness, which oftentimes persons sometimes discuss apart from African retention, but Blackness is informed by components of African retention, as well as a choice not to retain.
So, as I said before, this presentation by Monique Barnett Davidson was one of my favorites. So the purpose of curating culture is not just to have academics present, but to also have practitioners, people on the ground, people in the field, working to come and share their experiences. And the visual art, more than anything else, contains a lot of our intangible cultural heritage, because after all, intangible culture has to be expressed, right? So in that way, we start to talk about things like ideas and philosophies, and it's these ideas and philosophies that are expressed in the art. So art is, I don't want to say subjective, but it is subjective and not objective, right? So this first piece that Monique discussed about Zoria Allen, and we see the image of a student, not sure if it's male or female, but then we want to assume
It's female.
that it's female, right? So she set the premise to say what the discussion is about. It's about African continuities in visual arts. And then now why this obviously aligns with ACIJ JMB's mandate is the continuities, and how this image shows a student in a uniform that confines you, and that suggests a kind of, it's our military
Rigidity.
people, rigidity, right? It's our military people, it's the police force, it's the army, it's our nurses that wears uniform, and mostly uniform is in the British colonial system. So we have this student wearing a uniform, but the hair is untamed and the hair is out. So it is obviously resistance, not rebellion, but resistance. But what I like about Monique's discussion is it brings art critique as well. If you're a student of art, if you have to do any type of critique or analysis, and it talks about activism through art, the different resistance, because when you start to look at Oba Omi, the other one, when you start to look at Nani, you know, that portraiture, it's very interesting, the things that you can learn from this presentation. So we see also that the National Gallery is not just a place where you put on exhibition. It's not just painting and pictures and thing on the wall, but these artistic expressions are imbued with different philosophies. And she mentioned it herself that as a student of culture, you'd be able to appreciate these things and appreciate the expressions.
It's not just singular to art, it's everyone. Everyone can find some part of that exhibition
Right.
that will resonate with them.
Right, and she mentioned it as well. Barnett Davidson mentioned that it's about identity. So as you watch this presentation, as you go throughout and you see the different pieces of art, think about identity and the African identity, and how the artist, you know, tries to show this through every stroke, through every snap of the camera. So this was one of my favorites. And now we're going to come to our final
one.
presentation that
Some
we
would
have.
say saving the best for last.
Yes, saving the best for last. And this is our own director, Dr. Kate Henry.
Now, the topic that I'll be sharing or engaging you and the audience online with this afternoon is creativity as political thought and action in Afro-Jamaican religions. And this topic is quite important because disciplines such as cultural studies, which I'm grounded in, does not concern itself enough with the business of the sacred. And to now engage this conversation where we talk about creativity as a process in Afro-Caribbean religions is quite important in furthering that literature. Now, there are two primary objectives that I want to achieve today. One, to examine the politics of protest within the creative ethos of African Jamaican religions. And two, to understand the spirit as an active agent of protest in African Jamaican religions. Now, there are some guiding questions that I've been engaging with in talking about and completing this research. The first of which is, how has creativity been used by practitioners of Afro-Jamaican religions in the construction of their cultural and spiritual identities? Two, of what significance are creativity and spirituality to notions of liberation in post-colonial Jamaica? Three, how can creativity and the sacred be used to further conversations of decolonial studies in the Caribbean?
So there we had Dr. Henry sharing about the theme and the idea of of religious dress, of creativity and religion coming together to be a form of resistance against colonialism. I'm sure he would express it in more words, more academic terms, but what I gathered from his presentation is that the sacred is not really separate from the creativity expressed in the sacred. And by the sacred, I am speaking towards assemblage, I'm speaking towards the dress that we see expressed in our religious settings. For example, revivalism. We had a showcase titled Sacred Attire.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier.
Right. So before now, I took it for granted that, you know, these were just fashionable people. But then you realize that most of the fashion is African centered in revivalism, how the dress is assembled, the tie around the head, and how the uniforms are worn. There's a mixture and the incorporation of dashiki. There's also the incorporation of the plant, and spiritual practice like revivalism seek to maintain the African identity. But it's not just maintaining the African identity. The political thought behind it is that of resistance to colonialism, right? So we are going to use your Bible, we are going to pray, we are going to maintain rituals.
But we are incorporating our own, we're making it our own.
Yes, we're making it our own and we're keeping our African identity. So that's the thing that stood out in Dr. Henry's presentation. Again, another very highly referenced work if you want to conduct your own research. When you go to watch the presentation, you will get a lot of tokens. It's probably a little, you have to listen a little closer than the other presentations. It's very heavy with academic language, but we cater to everybody. Curating culture is for the academic and for the practitioner. So take that into consideration. And another point that he made through this political expression is that of identity. And we find that at the ACIJ JMB, even through our intangible cultural heritage, even through our memory bank, the things that we want to highlight more than anything else is the African identity, the African continuity.
And throughout all 7 of these presentations, you know, that has been a recurring theme.
Yes.
The identity through language, the identity through Rastafari, the woman identity in the Rastafari space, Dr. Pennant looking at the African identity and how it ties to the development of the metropole.
Yeah.
So that's a recurring theme throughout all of these presentations. And again, as Roger said, a recurring theme throughout the work of the ACIJ.
Yeah, and I also remember, I think it's Barnett Davidson that spoke about blackness in relation to African identity, and that blackness incorporates the African identity. So it tells me that blackness is a topic by itself, you know, and how we've discussed being black, not just in Jamaica, but in the Caribbean and in the diaspora, and how we express these things through our intangible cultural heritage. So we've gone through the 7 presentations that we had in season 1, and I hope this has whet your appetite to continue following us and watching us on Curating Culture. Our next Curating Culture will be on September 5th, as we seek to air on the first Thursday of every month. So if there is someone, an academic or a practitioner that you think could be on Curating Culture, you can just send us an email at
info@acij-ioj.org.jm.
Right,
And or leave it in the comments below. You can engage with us on our Instagram at ACIJJMB, on our Facebook, which is at ACIJJMB, or our full name, African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica. So you can engage with us on our social media. You can see what we're doing, what our ongoing work or outreaches, and our other online engagements.
And additionally, if you want to be a part of our mailing list, you can also drop your email in the comments. And of course, you will see your email address if you send us an email. Anything else we'd like to share?
I think that's it. I hope everyone enjoyed this review of Curating Culture. I enjoyed, because even though I was there, Georges and I were there for all 7 of them. Rewatching these videos now, I was like, you hear things that you heard a second time. So we encourage you to go and rewatch.
Right, so until next time on Curating Culture, where we curate to educate.